Hello, Walt Disney International Advanced Practitioners. Of course, it's your friendly neighborhood futurist, Frank Spencer again. And this week we're going to be looking at causal layered analysis. Don't sweat, it's going to be awesome. As a matter of fact, recently we had a chance to do CLA with the team in Japan. Great hit, great success. And we also did it with the newly minted team in Italy, and of course the Germans were there as well, and it was a great success with them too. I would of course in both of those instances give a shout out to Richard Ramsey, who has adopted this tool as his own and is super excited about it, as he should be, because CLA, I think at first for a lot of people seems really intimidating and maybe not useful, or how do we show this to people, or how do we get people engaged and involved in it, or I'm quite honestly too afraid to try to walk somebody through it because I don't think that I'll be equipped to do it. Nonsense. You absolutely can, and not only can you, but really quite honestly with every team that we've done this with, even early on, and with the with you guys, the advanced practitioners as well, it's always been successful. I think when we walk through it, it seems like it's a deep and ethereal and conceptual and maybe heady tool, but it has fantastic application and great outcomes. And so I want to share some of that with you today on this video. Now, the reason that I'm not doing the slides today is because you've seen the CLA slides, and I want to share with you something that we didn't put in the manual. And that is that we often call it CADG, and I think we may have shared this with a few of the teams, but we call causal layered analysis many times narrative transformation. And the reason we call it narrative transformation is because we really believe that besides being a great change management tool, CLA is also a fantastic tool to start building scenarios. And the reason I hesitated for a moment is because it's also a great tool to get people from the place of bridging, is what I want to say, bridging people from assumptions and biases and trend recognition to really getting into stories. As a matter of fact, put an even more specific way, I would say it's a great tool to get leadership from issues and problems and areas of focus to using story as a means to relay those issues and to really use the power of story. Again, I want to just share with you, again I hesitate because I want to share with you something that I may have never said before, but that you can find in many places all over the net. Most of you have probably heard that story is a fantastic tool to use for many things, for change management, for organizational development, for talent development, and as you know, in strategic foresight, for strategy, for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for product development, etc. Now, as the Walt Disney Company, everybody is fairly well versed in the power of story. And as any entertainment company would be, but especially the Walt Disney Company, you know that using story is a vehicle for culture change, for consumer development, for employee retention. That the company themselves shares a fantastic story. I wrote down a couple of really powerful ideas about what story does, and I have them off to my left over here. And they're this: stories are an ancient and foundational form of communication. Stories are really something that goes back to the dawn of time. And being able to put what we want to do, what we want to accomplish, what not only our vision is, but the things that we want to actually get our hands on, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, story helps us to do that. It's a fantastic way to communicate. And so really when you stop and think about language and communication, etc., and this is at the heart of the CLA tool, is language and communication, stories really help us to communicate most effectively. And we're able to tell not just a story, but good stories, deep stories, robust stories, stories that really have all the elements that are needed for people to have a mind shift and a mind change. That's a great way to communicate. And CLA, as I'm going to show you in just a moment, in the form of narrative transformation, allows us to do that. So stories are also about the human alliance. They connect us to like-minded passions. You'll remember many times that we've shared with you that passion-oriented cohorts, or seeking passion, or seeking multiple identities is for passion-oriented lifestyles is a big trend today. It's a big pattern that's emerging. Stories are coming to the forefront again across industries, not just in an entertainment company like the Walt Disney Company, but also at other companies that you wouldn't expect them to rise in, product development companies, manufacturing companies. Story is becoming an integral point and arc across these companies, and something that is really allowing people to bind together and understand the vision, the mission, the passion of the company. And so again, CLA, as I'm going to show you in just a moment, helps you to do that and bridge the issues, the problems, the focal issues that the leadership's dealing with to the power of strategic foresight. CLA is an integral tool to do that with. Stories are the way that the human mind works. So in reality, when you stop and think about it, just as I've often shared with many of you, that gaming really is something that's integral to the human experience. We basically game our whole lives when you stop and think about it. Stories the same way. Our lives are a story. That's why we watch movies about people's lives that are stories. That's why we love to watch stories. That's why movies are popular, TV shows are popular, songs are popular, because they tell a story. And so it's really the way our mind works. It puts things in a beginning, a middle, and an end, a point, a purpose, an outcome. This is the way that we relay information. So it's sort of sad that organizations for a long time, becoming so mechanical, forgot that story is an important and integral aspect of organizational development or business development or just life experience in general. And it's really the way towards success. So strategic foresight utilizes scenario development and CLA, as you're just about to see, to really help people to bridge issues or data or problems to story. Also, stories create order. They have structure. They bring understanding and purpose out of chaos. And so when we are just trying to look at an issue, or we're just trying to look at a problem, many times we have a hard time digging into it, whether we're quantitative based in our mindset or more qualitative based in our mindset, whether we consider ourselves data scientists or creatives, as if there's really a divide between those two. Stories help us to create order out of chaos. They help us to make sense of our situation. And that's why strategic foresight employs scenario development and tools like CLA, there's others, to really help us to bring about that order and to really understand what we can do. They bring order to the future. So that's why a tool like CLA is so important, because it helps us on that journey, as you're about to see, to creating these stories to create order. Stories also help us to just create, period. They really are a catalyst to bring about different ideas, new ideas. They help us to really see what could be, what might be, what is, what needs to change. And so that's why strategic foresight is so important, because it employs story as an integral and primary element of understanding the future, harnessing it, and leveraging it. Stories trigger change. Even when you see a story just about somebody's life, it really helps us to understand the why of life, the outcomes, what we should do next, what actions we need to take, what outcomes might appear. And so stories are really a catalyst for change. And that's a great jumping off point, I believe, for what I would call narrative transformation. As I told you at the beginning of the video, we often call CLA narrative transformation. And as a matter of fact, I just want to share with you briefly that Yvette and myself here at Kedge have just had the privilege of being published in the brand new CLA reader. The CLA reader, and this is version 2.0. And so the Causal Layered Analysis Reader 2.0 just came out. I don't think it's even available online yet, although by the time you see this video, maybe it will be. I know that Sohail Inyatullah who of course is now resides, I have to make sure that I spell his name right, so give me a moment, who now resides in Australia and teaches at Suncoast University. I believe he may have moved on since then, but I'm sure that he still does some teaching at Suncoast, probably a couple of other universities in Australia as well. He's a futurist, he's a foresight practitioner, but also a foresight academic. And he actually is a creator of causal layer analysis. It's at least a decade old. And it's being used all over the world, as we've shared with you before, in governments like Singapore. They use CLA all the time. A lot of academies or universities are using CLA. Even some MBA programs are now using CLA as part of their course development and how to understand not only the future but our present story. As I was telling you just a moment ago when we were explaining story, it's very important, and in foresight work as well, because remember, the future is not really about the future. Futures thinking is about what happens today. The way we see the future dictates the actions we'll take today. So that means futures thinking really helps us in our actions today. So it's important for us to know our present story before we start trying to create new stories. So again, this is why CLA, I believe, is a very important tool, and I'm so happy to know personally Sohail, and to be published in his new CLA Reader 2.0. We have a chapter in there, and that chapter is called, you probably can guess what it is. It's called Narrative Transformation. And this should speak volumes about what it is that we believe about CLA. Not a very good "in" at the end there. We really believe CLA is a story tool. It's a narrative tool that helps us not only in change management, but also in scenario development, and to really lead us to those robust stories that will create change and bring about human alliance and rewire the way we think and are foundational for communication across the company, etc. So besides foresight, stories do those things. Foresight employs story in a big way, and CLA is a big part of our story building toolkit. So first thing, as I said earlier, is another reason that we created narrative transformation is I want to have you not be afraid of causal layered analysis. I don't want you to be afraid and think it's a tool that's too ethereal or too conceptual. It's not. It's actually, once it's gone through and completed, a very grounding tool. I agree 100%. It begins conceptually. It doesn't end that way. It ends very powerfully. And that's why, as you well know, CLA includes elements such as systems thinking, structures, and leadership, and especially outcomes and action at the top of the iceberg. So let's get back down to brass tacks. By the way, I meant to say this, if you want to get the CLA reader and read our amazing chapter on narrative transformation, and a lot of other chapters as well, actually it's being used as a textbook at Tamkang University in Taiwan, where they have a big foresight program. Then you can visit online Meta Futures. If it doesn't have the S, then sue me. I'm not sure. metafutures.org. And you'll find all of Sohail's work there. Not the best looking website in the world, but this is where you can find the CLA Reader 1.0, and he recently told me that the 2.0 reader is going to be for sale on his website very soon, so this is where you'd be able to find that. So let's look at narrative transformation. That's what I want to share with you on the remainder of this video. If you get anything out of this video and you barely watch anything I said, just know that skip to this part of the video, or just when you're watching again, come back to the end and watch this last part. And don't be afraid of CLA. It's a powerful tool. We've had success with it every time we've done it. We've done it with change management groups and organizations at conferences. We've done it with small groups, with large groups. Every single time, people start off the first few minutes scratching their head, but you have to be courageous and confident in this tool. And once you've done it a few times, you will be. That's why Richard Ramsey is so excited about this tool. He now grasps the power of it and how to do it. And I've watched him several times. The expert professional that he is, really let people struggle for the first few minutes with it, and then once they start to catch on, boom, it's amazing what happens every time. So as you know, in CLA, and as you already have in your textbooks, that your giant textbooks that we give you at Advanced Practitioner Training, that we're basically looking at an iceberg. And it's much like the Titanic approaching the iceberg and only seeing this little bit of ice sticking out of the top and thinking, no big deal. But of course, the majority of reality is beneath the surface of the water, beneath the surface of the story or the organization or the issue or the problem. So if you just get nothing but that out of it, you should think, wow, strategic foresight is going to help me to get this big piece of ice underneath the water and not just focus on this tiny piece on the top. Because that's what we often do in organizations. We think we're going to solve our problems by moving that little bit of ice when it's immovable, or we're going to be able to get around it when that's not possible, or we'll just be able to just sort of plow over it and everything will be okay, and then when it wrecks our ship. So, of course, this is why change management processes are so hard in organizations, because they really fail to acknowledge all of the stuff that is underneath the surface of the water, or underneath the surface of our issues or problems in our organizations. So strategic foresight, and specifically causal learning analysis, is a great tool that helps us to do this. So we have changed this tool to be what we call narrative transformation. And by doing that, we're able to put the tool more in the form of a story. As I said a minute ago, CLA is great for change management or assumption and bias work, and it does both of those. This is why the tool's so great. It's doing multiple things at one time. But it's also great for building stories. And as I said a few minutes ago, it's important that we discover our own story first. And we're convinced we know our story. And a tool like this helps us to really uncover some things about our story we don't know. I cannot tell you one single organization I've ever worked with, including the Walt Disney Company, that fully knew their story when I was taking them through CLA. They're always shocked. As a matter of fact, there's one division within the Walt Disney Company that we worked with that was completely unaware of their present story. And they, were honest with us, told us afterwards when we did this tool with them, we had no idea, we were not looking carefully enough, and we just didn't know who we were. And now we're going to hopefully think about it a little bit more. They promised. I don't know what they did. So it's very important that we discover our own story, because if we don't know our story, then it's very hard for us to create new stories about the future. We may be creating the same story. We may be sticking to a linear version of our present story. More likely, that's exactly what's going to happen. And as I've often said to you and to others that we've trained within the company and outside the company, that trying to skip straight to scenario building before we really understand where we are now, what our assumption biases are, changing our mindset, restructuring our brain with the pattern of stories is useless, because we're going to build the same future or that we already know, or a linear future, or what we call the official future, which is the one that's in our brain subconsciously. So we want to get that subconscious out. So we call this narrative transformation, as I said a few minutes ago. And I'm just going to write narrative trans up here. And instead of looking at this like an iceberg, we often look at it like it's a story. Because remember that I've told you before that a story has a beginning and a middle and an end. And so that's very helpful, because it lets us know that how to actually construct stories. Now, of course, that couldn't be more simple. This is kindergarten material here. But it's amazing, myself included, that when we actually go to try to construct stories, our present story, and understand it, or new stories about the future, that we really forget this very basic but vital and useful construct about stories, that there must be a beginning, there must be a middle, and there must be an end, and we must understand those elements in order to move forward. So in narrative transformation, instead of looking at what in CLA and in your manual is worded as the litany, or the facts, or what you would see on the news, the above the iceberg kind of stuff. It's above the water. And then right below the surface of the water is systems. And those are those structures, actors, rules, policies, organizational processes that are in place. And those are both pretty easy to tackle. All we really need to ask someone when we're doing this tool is, what is the litany we're trying to tackle? Is it a certain problem? Is it a certain idea? Is it a certain outcome that we would like to see changed? A change management process, right? And then systems, we are able to talk about what systems are there that are causing this outcome to be as it is. Easy enough, right? And I'll give you an example in just a moment. And then right below the systems, much deeper down in the water, is values or culture, which are pretty much one and the same. Our culture is embedded with the values that we hold. And of course, the Walt Disney Company has different values than Google might have, or another company. So that's one of the reasons why it's sort of dangerous to benchmark. Benchmarking has its place, obviously, but we have to understand that it's difficult to benchmark when our values aren't the same as another company. So it doesn't mean we ignore benchmarking, but it means that we clearly understand our values and our culture, especially if we feel there's something in it that needs to change. And then right below values and culture is what we call myth and metaphor. And that doesn't mean these things aren't true, obviously. What it means is that we all hold myths about how the world works, why things are the way they are, why people are the way they are, why the universe is the way it is, why people act the way they act. And a lot of that comes from deep-seated ideas or bedrock stories, as we would say, or almost archetypes about life, and that can come from the family we were raised in, the culture we were raised in, etc. So when we dive down in CLA, we go from litany to systems to values to myths and metaphors to really help us to understand why we're doing what we do. In other words, going back up again, and I know you already understand this, but I'm setting the stage for narrative transformation. It's the myths and metaphors that really create the values and culture that we have. It's the values and culture that we have that really cause us to choose the systems over other systems or other structures or leadership models or organizational models that we have. And it's those systems that are causing the outcomes that we have. It's not a person that we hired. It's not just a process that was put in place. It's all of those systems together, that systemic thinking, systemic designs that are causing the issue that we're dealing with, the problem that we're dealing with, the thing that we would like to see change. And so to really understand those things, we have to dive down deep. Now, I know you're asking again, but Frank, what happens when someone asks me, are you saying that we have to change our values? Are you saying we'll change our myths and metaphors? If they're myths and metaphors, can they be changed? And the answer is I couldn't agree more. Can they be changed? Can you change a myth and metaphor? I don't know that that's really important or not, whether you can or not change myths and metaphors. What's important is that we understand our myths and metaphors, that we know why we're doing what we do, because that causes us to be able to address them, to acknowledge them, to welcome new myths and metaphors in as new generations come into the workforce, etc. Then we know how to deal with things. And yes, I would say that it can also cause us to say, how can we alter our myths and metaphors, or how can we accept and implement new myths and metaphors? So that's CLA in a nutshell. We've changed it to read like this. The litany is the title. And as you know, all our scenarios, as we've preached over and over again, have to have titles. It's very important for us to have titles to our stories. A title really speaks to what the book is all about. It helps us to begin our journey into the story. So as I've showed in a slide before, Star Wars couldn't be a more simple name for a movie, but it's stuck. And it's a fantastic name for a movie. And it wouldn't have been nearly as good if it was called Good Guys and Bad Guys in Space. It would have been rejected outright. And so names of stories, or titles of stories, or books can really draw us in, and before we read them, and after we've read them, and after we know the story, help us to really understand. As a matter of fact, it becomes even deeper at that point. Oh, that's why the author named the story that. It has deep meaning to me. And I think, as Yvette has said to you guys many times before, a lot of scenario titles become like a zeitgeist or an idea, or I've often said virus, but that sounds like a bad thing. I mean this to be a good thing. It becomes a virus within the organization that people just can't get out of their head. Sort of like that worm that gets in your brain and you just can't forget about it. And so when people say, let's test strategy A or strategy B or strategy X or strategy Y or Z against the, name of book, scenario, or idea. And people automatically know what they're talking about. Let's test it against Star Wars. You would see the whole universe in your mind immediately if you're aware of Star Wars. And likewise it is with narrative transformation. So at the systems level, we call this elements. Elements. And the reason for that is because a book, as you start to get into it, has elements in the book. There's characters, there's structure, there's systems. It's basically the same thing, except when we get into this tool a little bit more, you'll see that it helps us to understand what would be the elements of my story. Where is it set? Who does what? Who holds what position? What did the heroes do? What did the villains do? Etc. And that's really the systems level. So, and story has elements to it, which get set up early in the book usually, if not, because it helps us to understand where this book is set, where we're going with it, who the characters are, and there's a little bit of setup in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Then as we get a little bit deeper into the book, the values and culture level, this is where we get to theme. Now, a story can have more than one theme, obviously. It can have several themes. This story could be about jealousy and love loss. Romeo and Juliet, I saw a great little cartoon yesterday that said, for those who have never read Romeo and Juliet before, they think it's a story about young love and passion and romance. But really, Romeo and Juliet is a story about a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old falling in love, and over 3 days' time they kill 6 people, basically. So it gives you a whole different aspect on what a theme of a story might be. Really, our organizational theme, or our story theme for our company, is going to be multi-faceted, right? It's going to have a lot of elements and a lot of dimensions and dynamics to it, just as values or culture do. But when we start to really tell a story more, instead of trying to just have this be cut and dry, then we start really thinking about what those themes of the story are. And then this is my favorite one, myths and metaphors. We translate this into what we call images. And everybody knows when you go to the bookstore, you're drawn to pick up the book many times, unless you're brilliant, as all of you are. People love picture books. It means we don't have to read as many words. We love to see pictures. But seriously, pictures are valuable, right? Many songs throughout history have said a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so these images don't have to be pictures, but they're images we get in our head. A great example of this is in several movies that I'm thinking of, there's several going through my head right now, people will read a book, Harry Potter would be a great example, and then they go to this theater and they see the characters and they say, that's not how I pictured the character when I read the book. So a good author, a good storyteller, allows the readers to paint these images in their mind, and people have different images of what things look like, right? And so that's why we need to be able to define what those images look like, and to be able to somewhat get on the same page about our images so that we understand those deep bedrock stories that are taking place. And so this is how we actually use CLA in a way that helps us to build stories and scenarios. And so today I'm trying to help you to understand that CLA can be used not only as a change management tool, not only as an assumption and bias tool to help us understand as we go down the iceberg or down the ladder who we are, what we do, what our values and our culture are, why we do what we do from a deep myth and metaphor perspective. But they also allowed us to build stories about our organization that we may not have known existed, and that way we can really relate our story, both to ourselves, to the foresight teams, and then to others as well. So just think about how powerful it is when you actually are able to create a title instead of just an idea, when you actually are able to explain the elements of your story, when you're able to identify 2 or 3 different themes in the story, and then you're able to tell the images of what that looks like. I think this is actually even more helpful than myths and metaphors because it just sounds crazy. But when you talk about images, what images does the Walt Disney Company bring up? It brings up mouse ears, right? But it brings up families, and it brings up happiness, and you can see people in the park, and you can see people, having fun and eating the big turkey leg at Walt Disney World. I jest, but it brings up all those images of magic and happiness and family. And that helps us to really understand who we are. It goes much deeper than that, of course. Now, the great thing about creating this as narrative transformation is it does more than that for us. Because it allows us, and I'm going to do it over on this side, even though I think as a good American, I should be going from left to right or right to left or whatever. I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to do this in a more Asian, especially Japanese kind of way. And right over on this other side here. So you can see here we went down our story, but we can also go back up. So when we go back up in our story, that's when, once we understand or we've discovered our story, now we can reframe or create a new story. And we've done this with many of the groups before, but I'm going to show you a little secret as narrative transformation relates to scenario building. And that is creating new images, because I think sometimes when we talk about our deep myths and metaphors, we struggle. But when we talk about creating new images, we're not doing this to try to change the myths and metaphors. We're doing this to explore, to discover. What would new myths and metaphors look like? What new story might it create? How might it change? It's almost like when you see these movies, or now it's becoming more popular online as people are developing their own stories on places like YouTube or Vimeo, or even in video games where you have the alternative endings to stories or movies. Click here to see the alternative ending on your DVD. Play this video and choose an alternative ending. Choose an alternative ending to your story in video games. One of the reasons that video games are so popular is because everybody that plays them has a different experience and a different story. And so they're able to change images or myths and metaphors. So if our images in our story over here are a ring and a volcano and Mordor and an eagle and a hobbit. What might be new images of the story? Well, they could be completely different, right? They could be a fellowship, and they could be, you've probably already gone ahead of me where I'm going with this one. They could be an axe, and they could be dwarves, and they could be wizards. And those might be new images in the story that didn't exist in our previous story. In this particular story, Lord of the Rings, they did exist, yes I know. But this could be our new images in the story that really speak to a new way to see the story. Rather than a hobbit going on a treacherous journey to try to drop a ring into a pool of hot lava, we could have a story about the fellowship and the camaraderie and the wizardry and all that went on, which actually is what happens in a good story. There's multiple images, there's multiple myths and multiple metaphors. It doesn't often happen in companies because we have to try to work off the same page and be in the same myth and metaphor. What would it look like if we explore, don't try to change them, explore new myths and metaphors? And so if that happens at our images level, then we keep going back up and we say, what new themes might that create? This theme over here there might be a theme of treachery, or horror. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. And but our new themes coming out of fellowship and wizardry and all might be adventure and vision and exploration, And so therefore we've created new themes in our story, a new story. And this could go on. You don't want to just write 3 necessarily. Let your group explore. Let everybody, add new ideas. And I think, again, if you're asking, how is this really different from CLA? I think it really sets it in a story form. And so, especially for a company like the Walt Disney Company, but I think for anybody, it helps them to get away from I'm thinking so hard about what the value of my company is, and now they're saying oh, what new themes might be created, what new story would be created if we changed the myths and metaphors. Yvette often says, by the way, and I think this is important to throw in, that images don't have to be completely changed. They can carry over and mean something slightly different. You could take ring here to mean, treacherous, but over here, the ring might have been seen as power. And I mean that in a good way in this particular instance and not a bad way. So as you move up past theme, you obviously get to the elements of the story, and there you're going to have mountain, and you're going to have group dynamics. Remember when they were all deciding who goes on the journey? They sort of had a little organizational powwow. And then you're going to have, leadership, top-down leadership, or, actually in this one, it would be shared experience. There's sort of shared leadership. I've just done narrative transformation on Lord of the Rings. Look at that. Wonderful. John Su, my friend in China, you could do CLA on Star Wars. I know you're a big fan. You should watch this video and do CLA on Star Wars, and that would help everybody to understand how the tool works. And so then once you've understood that you've got this new, these new elements, then basically you can tell a new story here. And that new story for me would probably be something about the Fellowship of the Ring, whereas, over here, you might have been telling Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Ring with Sauron and scary, and you've got something bad going on. The Fellowship of the Ring was really about the camaraderie, the networking, the shared vision, and the passion, and all that. And so you've got a new story that you're telling over here, which is about collaboration, about fellowship, about shared purposes, about. And to get very, very, very specific, it may be, a story called something like "We Did It," which really speaks to the power of the group, or the network of power, or something like that. Okay, I'm being a little bit silly here, but you get the point, and that is that we can, once we discover our story, then we can recast or reframe or recreate a new story. Now, call me crazy, but the great part about this is that we don't have to create only one new story. And as you may already be thinking, don't we write multiple scenarios? How will going back up once help me to write a suite of scenarios, which you have preached over and over again is very important, Frank? Well, I have. And that means that you don't only have to go back up one time. We can go back up multiple times. I've seen people actually do this tool and go back up more than 3 times. But as we know, we have a transformative story, and we have our scenario, and we have a market scenario, right? And we have a fortress scenario. And if that's the case, then we absolutely know how we will change our images. Because now we'll ask our audience, now that we've discovered our story, to recast our story. Let's do this several times. Let's think about how these images would be changed for each one of these settings. What would be more transformative images than the ones that we came up with? And maybe your images are very transformative, and so in that case, we would just sort of shift those over and recast them and think about them slightly differently. Or what would be the fortress version of these images? So say that your images were just sort of benign and agnostic, or maybe they're very transformative. We want to look at what the opposite of those would be, or more dystopic kinds of images. And you get the idea here. What would more market or more linear or middle of the road kind of images look like, rather than the ones that we came up with? And that way you can begin to tell 3 different kinds of stories that include images and themes and values and culture and elements, structures and leadership and dynamics and organizational processes, and eventually even titles of scenarios. So as you can see, when you practice this just a little bit, it doesn't take that much. Use it with your futures group at first and get comfortable with it, but you definitely want to take this on a road show, because the power of CLA is in the starter dough for scenario development. Because remember, when we tell those stories, we need to tell very robust scenarios that include not only ideas, but help to transport our readers and to suspend disbelief. And to do that, we need to include why do people do what they do, and what will they do, and what values will change, and what new elements might appear, and all of that. And this tool really can help you to do that, to really walk through those and purposefully and intentionally think about what those would be. Then when you go to create your scenario out of the trends that you found and the patterns that you've made and the implications, all of that will be able to connect with this idea of the present story that we have and different futures or outcomes that we could have when we tweak, when we change, when we see different things happen, when we see new trends or ideas that would emerge, especially at this images level, how the world might change or look different. And this is another reason why scanning is so vital. I cannot stress enough to you, I'm so proud of the Italian and German teams, and others as well, but they're brand new, so I'm giving them some props. How they have just taken to scanning immediately, and they're scanning like crazy. They left the training and immediately went to the airport and started creating pictures of themselves doing transformative things and doing market things and fortress things. I was amazed, and I'm so happy and excited to see that they took to it so readily. I cannot stress to you how important it is for you not to rely upon your brilliance. You're all brilliant. But that's one of the things that can really hinder us the most, is that we're so brilliant and we want to express how brilliant we are to everyone else, that we rely upon our expertise and our brilliance, and we forget to look outside of our area and be continual learners. And that's what scanning does. It rewires the brain to learn, unlearn, relearn. I know I've told you that a million times, but it's so important. When you scan, the more you know, the more a tool like this is easier and easier, because you're able to fill in images and ideas that are happening out there, values that are changing, new ideas that are emerging, new images that are emerging in public, because you know the trends and you know the patterns. And so scanning is so important to a tool like narrative transformation as well. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to say to you just to wrap up the video, but let me just stress one more time, I didn't want to leave this point untouched for at least the third time in the video, and that is that a tool like this, when you're creating these different pathways back up and even labeling them by the different which world scenarios that eventually you want to build with your trends and patterns and implications, etc., that this will help you to fill in all those gaps with the values, the settings, the elements, the ideas, what could unfold, what might be. And again, that will help the leadership to connect their issues, their strategies, their problems to story, which will help them to change and create new outcomes, which is at the heart of strategic foresight. It's not the only thing that's done, but even when you create a trend deck, it's a type of a story. And as India just so brilliantly did, and Australia as well, and their new trend decks, amazing. And I didn't get to see Singapore's, I heard it was a knockout. They have been able to tell a story with their trend decks rather than just showing trends in PowerPoint or a keynote, which is just as boring as having it as a report on your desk. And stories and discussions and deep narrative discussions have taken place as a result of it. So it's amazing. Props to you guys. Fantastic. So I wanted to just share with you briefly too, at the theme level, right here, which is your values and your culture level. I want to share briefly with you what some of those themes could be when you're moving from a CLA model more to a narrative transformation and saying, let's think about this tool specifically in terms of building our scenarios as a part of the process of bridging assumptions and biases to scenario building, bridging problems or issues or focal points to scenario building, bridging our value discovery, our trend discovery, or pattern making to scenario building. We're going to use this tool, and it's going to really help us tremendously to know who we are, what needs to change, what a new future could look like? At that theme level, what is this story about at its core? Why is the story being told? Those are things that can help you at that value level. It's the why. That often says to our clients, it's more important to know why than what. It's more important to know why than what. And CLA helps you to do that. We want to get right to what, because that's action. And of course, we have to get to action. Foresight without action is useless. And so we're big proponents of moving to action and outcomes. But we need to ask why if we're going to get to more valuable and transformative action and outcomes, instead of being incremental in our outcomes and not understanding the disruptors that are ahead of us. What is it about the hero, in quotes, might be a group of people, might just be in a day in the life, but that's sort of the hero of your story. What is it about the hero of this story that helps the audience to identify with that individual or group? Specifically, what is it about them? And so that's at the theme level again too. It's the values, the culture, the why they do what they do. What conflicts arise as a result of the elements in the story, and what obstacles are created. So as a result of these elements or these systems or these structures in place, or the setting of the story and where it takes place and the things that impact it, it might be technologies, it might be policies, it might be environmental restrictions or concerns, or it might be new transformative pathways. What elements of the story, or what is it in the elements of the story that cause conflicts to arise, or new pathways to arise, or new obstacles to arise, or new openings or new doorways to open up. And so just a couple more. What does the hero want? What specifically is it that they're looking for? That would really be at that theme level too. Is it love? Is it passion? Is it meaning? And so what is the culture made of? In other words, what is the new culture that the hero is seeking? As a matter of fact, some of you may be familiar with the hero's journey, which is a great way. Joseph Campbell, if you've never looked it up, look up the book A Hero with 1,000 Faces. The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's Joseph Campbell. It's all about myth and metaphor, and how basically the whole world works on myth and metaphor. So if you think this tool is ridiculous, it's actually well-founded in understanding culture and understanding values, and how that's so important to trends and action. What will the hero lose if he or she does not overcome adversity or reach the aspirations? That would really be at the theme level as well. So you can see how this helps you to go beyond just writing. Let's write down some values. Happiness. What's another value? Truth. What's another value? Honesty. What's another value? Family, and etc. So you can do that in CLA. But when you're really creating things, that you might be looking for whole phrases or ideas or concepts rather than just simple words. And I think that personally that's helpful. Obviously, it's easy to write single words and think about those, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're really thinking about themes, you might be thinking about, love lost, or joy, found, or something. I don't know how useful that was, but you get the idea that we're looking more at fuller ideas and concepts than we are just at simple value-laden words, and it really can help us to paint a bigger, more robust picture. And so, how is victory defined in the story as well? That's also at that theme level. That's really where we understand that victory is defined, or that anything is defined. This is where definitions are, right? This is where we define our world, is at the theme level. And so I hope that's helpful to you. There's a lot more that can be said, and I know there's tons of questions, but if I leave you with nothing else today, it's that this is a great tool to help in scenario building. It's a powerful one to bridge assumption and bias work, which is critical for strategic foresight, to getting into the weeds of trend hunting and pattern making and all that. Because if you do not understand where you're coming from first, and you don't understand the myths and metaphors and ideas, the themes, the images that are really driving us, then we're going to really struggle in trend identification and building new patterns and being broader thinkers and expanding our minds or rewiring our brains, unlearning and relearning. And that's why CLA, or narrative transformation, is so important. So I hope that helps you. And I will see you next time on the next video. Until then, take care and write me, write Yvette, write Nicole, ask us any questions. We're here to help. Take care.